wait for the technical team to take care of the hybrid system, but now everything is set. Thank you to the Geneva Environment Network for their welcome and also assistance in setting this up. I'm very happy that we have some people here and some people online. My name is Madeleine Hamel. I work for UN University Center for Policy Research, UNUCPR. We are an independent think tank working for the United Nations system with a presence in New York and a small one here in Geneva. We've been working with the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights and Climate Change, Elisa Morgera, for the past year, and we've been very happy to accompany her in releasing her report, The Imperative of Defossilizing, or Economies, which has been presented to the General Assembly back in July. The report is a very important piece, drawing from vast bodies of knowledge across health, labor, trade, finance, and biodiversity to really bring up this knowledge and showcase the fact that wherever we look at whichever level, basically fossil fuels are having a detrimental impact on our daily lives. And I think this report is going to be a really helpful advocacy tool for local activists, for local climate change defenders, also at the policy level here in Geneva, in Nairobi, in New York. And today, we're going to focus more on the local level, which I'm personally really excited about. This is something that, in the policy work, we don't necessarily often see, but we have so many different speakers joining us online, with one, Sean, in person, who are going to talk about their experiences on the ground, best practices, also perhaps challenges that they've encountered. And I suggest we start with the Special Rapporteur, who's going to talk to us about her report, highlighting some findings, and then going into discussion with the speakers. Thank you. And also, we're going to have time for questions at the end of the session, so please don't hesitate. I'm also talking to people in the room to consider this as an informal space. We're between us, so please feel free to interact freely, ask questions. We're also here to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the partners that have made this meeting possible. I'm so excited about it. And I think these are the kind of conversations that we really need to engage more and more. While I was heartened by the welcome of my reports on defossilization as a human rights imperative at the Human Rights Council in July this summer, there are, of course, many important questions that were raised during the dialogue with states, particularly in the context of how we can advance the defossilization of our economies in the very diverse contexts of different countries that, of course, some have contributed historically to climate change, some are high emitters, but maybe at different levels of development. And of course, there's also the question of how all countries should consider the phase out of fossil fuels as a matter of protecting the human right to health and to life, to water, to food, cultural rights, because of those impacts of fossil fuels throughout their life cycle that go above and beyond the contribution that fossil fuels make to climate change and its own compounding impacts on all human rights. And these remain very complex and a very, I guess, contentious topic, I think, for how much the report may have made a contribution, which to some extent has been also confirmed by the findings of the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion on states' obligations on climate change, really recognizing how not only the consumption, but also the exploitation of fossil fuels, production, subsidies, and the licensing for new exploration of fossil fuels may all be activities that are now in violation of international law and multiple sources of international law. This still remains a topic that needs to be addressed in context through very participatory, inclusive processes in each country. And I can understand how challenging this is also to make sure we include workers who may be negatively affected by the phase out, and who also may have critical knowledge for that phase out to be conducted in a responsible way, and to bring any relevant knowledge into that transition towards fully renewable based economy. Of course, this presents also many important aspects of intergenerational equity and thinking about intergenerational dialogues and approaches where all voices can be heard, including of children, older persons, and understanding and maybe thinking about how we can relate to future generations as well. And this is why I find that the conversation can only advance so much in an abstract. And what's really important is to look at practical ways, experiences of innovation from the bottom up, where we have been able to co-develop approaches to have difficult conversations, to really listen and co-develop solutions. And there is an important point in my report, which is on the one hand, acknowledging that even putting on the table, even discussing explicitly the phase out of fossil fuels remains a challenge. And we've seen it here in Geneva during the negotiations of the Plastics Treaty, also in August. We're still seeing it in other fora. And to me, that is the challenge. How can we have that conversation right here and now in supportive, inclusive, generative ways, and ways that allow us to really make the most of the opportunity to imagine together a different kind of life, different societies, different economic models that are no longer dependent on fossil fuels and that can be fully aligned with our aspirations for sustainable development, for human flourishing, for supporting also planetary well-being. And so today we have such an incredible opportunity to hear about 4 experiences, very diverse, and that are not relating to fossil fuels necessarily, but which I wish to bring to everyone's attention today, sources of inspiration, of hope, and crucially of learning. And so hearing from our colleagues how they've been able to mobilize generative processes to have difficult conversations, and on that basis to co-develop solutions, scale them up or scale them wide, and really advance and understand what may be the lock-ins, what may be the barriers, and how we can generate those inclusive approaches that are relevant for the just transition, for climate mitigation, for climate adaptation, particularly at the local and city level, maybe also at the state or sub-state level, and really encourage all of us, and I will try and do that along as we go in thinking about what are transferable learnings, what are the insights, what are perhaps methodologies that have been co-developed as part of these processes, and that can give us ideas about how we can create more generative and inclusive conversations at the national level, but also internationally for the continued negotiations of the Plastics Treaty, potentially for the climate COP. And we know that the Brazilian presidency is really opening up spaces and encouraging use of different methodologies. But really in my role also as UN Special Rapporteur, I'm very keen to see whether with partnerships, every space in which we are discussing climate change and human rights, we can really integrate or at least experience and reflect upon different ways to come together and to be supported in addressing topics that maybe we're familiar with at a rational level, and yet we're not able to make the progress that we urgently need. And engage with science, engage with lived experiences of those most affected, and recognize the leadership, the vision, the inspiring progress that can be made, and think together about how that progress, no matter how far it goes and at which level it is, how it can help building a critical mass, building momentum, building true hope and commitment by others who maybe are still on the fence, I guess, about engaging in those difficult conversations. So I think I'll stop there, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all our partners and amazing innovators who are here with us, I'll introduce them as I give the floor to them. And the first initiatives we learn from is about the Durban's People's Plan on Adaptation by my colleague, Professor Kira Irwin, who's currently at Groundworks in South Africa, and her colleagues from the Durban Coalition Secretariat, Sogen Moodley, Italia Irwin. So Kira, you have the floor, and feel free to share the time with your colleagues as you deem fit.
Thank you so much, Elisa, and thank you to all of you. It's exciting for us to be here and to share the journey that we've been on. Sogen Moodley is going to present with me, and Thalia is here in the audience but won't be presenting today. I'm just going to share my screen, and you must forgive me because I have not used this before. Okay, I'm hoping very much that you can see it, and if you can't, just let me know.
Sadly not.
Not. Okay.
Let's try again.
All right. Okay.
Maybe while you try to do that, Kira, I remember another point I wanted to mention in the introduction, so I might just do that if you don't mind. I think another point that we can explore today is also the question of funding, again, a very difficult one. And that's, I think, another area where there can be so much innovation and where we may hear from all our panelists about innovative ways. And just to recall that in my report, one of the other thorny questions that states are quite reluctant to engage with is the question of reparations, of a human right to remedy in the context of the climate harm and other harm, be that biodiversity, toxic pollution, or human health that fossil fuels have caused. But the argument I make in the report is not only that fossil fuel companies clearly have the funds, the incredible profits, but also what they've been benefiting in terms of subsidies and other capture of tax income as well to contribute. But crucially, that process of opening up the space for meaningful remedies that can and should be guided by the lived experiences and the aspirations of the human rights holders that have been most affected by climate change and fossil fuel activities is also how we reclaim both space, the political space, but also the finance to really advance our climate action, our action in relation to economic inequalities, addressing economic inequalities and any other impacts on human rights in ways that are the most responsive and helpful for human rights holders. So Kira, the floor is yours.
Hi, apologies, I'm back. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to try and share, and I'm hoping it will work this time, but I wanted to restart Google Chrome. Yeah.
You need to send us the application because you are running it from a browser and it's not going to work actually.
Okay. Okay, so Elisa, I don't know if you want to maybe go to one of the other case studies just so we don't, then I'll come in second, and in the meantime, I'll send it to, should I send it to Federica?
Yes, thank you so much, Kira. Thanks for bearing with us. So in that case, I'll pass the floor to Sean McCabe, who's sitting next to me and who very generously made the trip to Geneva to be with us, who will be speaking about the Bohemian Football Club-led Just Transition, which I had the pleasure of visiting in Dublin not too long ago and has greatly inspired me. So Sean, you have the floor.
Thank you, Elisa. Hopefully my presentation should be successful. Do I have control here? I do. It's a pleasure to be here. It might be unusual to be hearing from a football club at an event like this, but we've got an interesting story, I believe, and it's a pleasure to share it with you. I have a lot of slides, so I'll go quickly. If I'm going too quickly, stop me. Let's see, here we go. So our football club is a little bit different because they're the owners. We're a fan-owned football club. That's quite different globally to the financialization of football that we've seen over the past number of years. That allows us to do things a little bit differently, and that's why we're doing work on climate justice specifically and the just transition in our community. We have existed since 1890 and we have been fan owned all of that time. This is where we've been since 1901 in the heart of Phibsborough in Dublin in Ireland. And there's a few reasons why you might have heard of us. Bob Marley played his last ever outdoor concert at our stadium in 1981. We've had a series of football jerseys that have attracted quite a bit of attention. Our partnership with Amnesty International around refugees and asylum seekers was an important one. This summer, we launched a jersey with Oasis, which raised money for an Irish migrant charity in Manchester. Last May 2024, we became the first team in Europe to host the Palestinian national team in a football match. Our women's team played the Palestinian women's team. It was a really beautiful occasion. And most recently, our most recent convert is Greta, who you might have seen on the flotilla wearing one of our jerseys. And we're hoping once she comes back safe and sound, we'll get her to Dalymount for a match. So let me tell you a little bit about our climate journey to date, because it's been an interesting one. It actually, it started, I suppose, in rooms like this one. I took that photo at COP21 in Paris in week 1. That was an event. I was working with Mary Robinson at the time, who was the UN Special Envoy on climate change at that moment, but she was also head of the Climate Justice Foundation that I worked for. And obviously the other person in that picture is Al Gore. But that was a meeting of, the first meeting essentially of the High Ambition Coalition that drove the Paris Agreement over the line fundamentally in the end, led by Tony de Broom, who has sadly since passed on. But what was interesting about those spaces was we were talking about very high-minded ideas about human rights informed climate action and how we were going to incorporate gender equality into the Paris Agreement and how we were going to incorporate children's rights into the Paris Agreement or Indigenous rights. And they were very good ideas, but they really had no resonance with my community or my friends at home. And that was an important insight for me. I felt like we were talking at two different levels entirely. So when we wound up the Mary Robinson Foundation in 2018, one of the first things I did was rent a camper van and drive around farmyards in Ireland, because in Ireland, one of the most intractable just transition issues is farming. Farming is the most carbon intensive or methane intensive process in Ireland. But it's also a lot of livelihoods, and a lot of important livelihoods, and a lot of political clout as well, and a lot of different stuff. So I wanted to get to the bottom of what was really at the heart of a just transition for agriculture in Ireland. And what I realized very quickly is it wasn't really about farmers not wanting a climate transition. They just didn't want a climate transition that they didn't belong to. And belonging became a very important theme of what was to be this report that I published in 2020 called The People's Transition. The basic idea behind The People's Transition was quite simple. You could have written it down on a napkin and handed it out on street corners, but you have to write a 100-page report sometimes for people to take you seriously. It was basically let people participate, value what they have to say, and then maybe most radically, let them co-own the solutions. And I believe that if we can get that right, we can create the type of virtuous cycle of action where people will demand the change that we need to see, and it will accelerate the climate transition. At the heart of that research was a concept called community wealth building. I don't have a huge amount of time to go into it right now, but the basic idea of community wealth building is that cities procure huge amounts of goods, and how they procure those goods is important for the just transition. If they localize their procurement, they will be able to create sheltered markets that allow communities who need support to respond to the demand side and create things like worker cooperatives that can allow them to do things like break intergenerational poverty while undertaking climate action. We're about to build, or we're in the process of building, or we're well down the road at this stage of building a new climate economy And the questions have to be asked about who controls the productive assets of that economy and how much of that flows into the hands of local communities. That report got a little bit of interest from a local bank, a national bank in Ireland. They gave me some money to prototype the initiative, and I won't go into this graph now, but basically the idea was we mapped our community, because we didn't first go out to the community and say, who cares about climate? Come talk to us about climate. Because if we did that, you'd get the same 7 people you always get talking about climate in your community. Whereas if you map your community, you find out things like we found out, where one street had 90% single mothers living on it. And if we didn't provide some sort of childcare, or at least go meet them where they were, we wouldn't hear from them in our planning. And so mapping a community makes sense if you want to listen deeply to what they have to say. The listening phase, then, we didn't ask them about climate issues, we asked them about the social issues that they were encountering. And in the solutions phase, we took away their issues and we said, well, let's come back with solutions that both address the climate crisis and address local community needs. And I think that's the root of just transition action. Because I think we're a little bit like this with climate action. We're a bit Sisyphusian, right? We're constantly pushing this boulder up a hill, and we ignore the fact that the hill is made out of poverty and inequality. And in Ireland, it's a housing crisis and it's a cost of living crisis. And so if we focus entirely on the boulder and not the hill, we actually make the job way too difficult for ourselves, and we're almost doomed to fail. So don't focus solely on the boulder. Try to solve the hill issue as well. We all know this graph. Oxfam publish it periodically before Davos and such events. The richest 10% of the world's population are responsible for about 49% of lifestyle consumption emissions. In Ireland, this graph holds almost identically the same, and it's true across Europe, right? The richest 500,000 people in Ireland are responsible for about 50% of Ireland's lifestyle consumption emissions, and the poorest 50% are responsible for about 10%. So what that tells us is that people's circumstances really determine whether they can act on the climate crisis at all or not. And this idea that we've been telling people for years that we all have to play our part is kind of nonsense. We have to recognize that there's people who are responsible for these crises that we're in, and there's people who are the victims of those crises. And that's, I suppose, the root of climate justice. This is us. We have a stadium in the middle of a community. That community owns us. I'm an owner of the club. We're all owners of the club. We have a vote at the AGM. So we have to respond to the needs of our community. And we recognize that, like, there's issues like racism and homophobia and gender inequality and all sorts of issues that we do tackle. And we have a football social responsibility strategy that looks at all of those things. But we have a climate justice strategy as well. And we were the first club in the world to come up with a climate justice strategy. One of the first things we did was go to our fans and ask them, like, what's going on in your lives? And we heard back a lot of things, but one thing we heard back was our members were finding it very difficult to pay their utility bills. In fact, 43% were struggling to pay their utility bills at least some of the time. That tells me that we have to consider that in how we take climate action. At the same time, I did a piece of work with the UNFCCC around their Sport for Climate Action agenda. And we did a survey that went out through numerous governing bodies all around the world. And we asked, again, questions about people's lives. But one question we asked was, what climate action is accessible to you? And we're not talking here about bamboo toothbrushes. We're talking about the real things that make a real difference in people's lives, like retrofitting of houses, or energy efficient appliances, heat pumps, solar power, organic food, electric mobility. And you can see here, we're not dealing with an awareness crisis. It's not an issue that people don't know about the solutions. They just can't afford them. We're dealing with an affordability crisis where people are priced out of climate action. Sadly, when you think about sport and climate action, too many people think of it like this. Football will give us the opportunity to access millions of individuals and change their individual behavior. And I think that's to tragically misconstrue what sport can do in the face of a climate crisis. What sport actually is, and what football really is this here. 5 million people on the streets of Buenos Aires celebrating Argentina's World Cup victory. Football is about belonging, that same sense of belonging that the farmers were looking for in Ireland in terms of a just transition. It is an authentic belonging, and we need to tap into places where there is authentic connection, because we've lived through an era of neoliberalism that has alienated people, left them feeling not part of their communities, left them feeling isolated. We have to go to places where there is genuine connection, and then we have to do genuine work to make sure that we can tap into that sense of belonging, and we don't cause them to become alienated from the thing that they're passionate about. So what we want to do with Bohemians is use the economies of scale that exist within football fandom to build community wealth through the climate action that we take. And what that looks like, I'll try to spin through here in a few short slides. This is the work we've been doing. This was my two junior colleagues' first day about 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago today. We took over an old gym building in the centre of Dublin that was kind of abandoned. We didn't have to pay much rent on it. And we mobilised the community. There's an old Irish concept called the mehel, which is where people come together to support each other in building stuff. So we relied heavily on volunteer initiatives, but we were able to build an office. And then subsequently, this was a second gym unit. We tore it asunder ourselves. It was unpleasant. We did hire an electrician. And that's our director of community, Tommy. He didn't really cut that. He's just posing. And so we rebuilt it. And now we have a community space where we're doing free community education for, we offer an 8-week program that includes off-grid solar, energy efficiency, and bike mechanics. But what people are really learning, it's not the skills that they're learning how to cooperate, they're learning how to work together, they're learning how to build a social fabric. And that's what's missing in terms of the just transitioning communities around the world. We also have this wonderful initiative that's just kicking off, where we're, football academies are quite dangerous places for young kids, because if football doesn't work out, they typically end up out of society a little bit. And so we've got some funding from a local utility company to put green trade pre-apprenticeship programs alongside our football academy, so that when kids don't succeed, and hopefully some of them will, but a lot won't, when that does happen, they can fall back into a green trade. And obviously Europe is crying out for skilled tradespeople for the transition. So this could be a pipeline in other football clubs around Europe. But the space has become much more than just an educational hub. This was Oxfam brought 50 climate activists from all across Europe to visit us and to work on joint strategies together. We have a community supported agriculture project where we have 50 families get their vegetables from our site every week. They also help the farmer. That means the farmer is a guaranteed income. They go out and work on the farm with them, and it's a solidarity economy piece that allows for people to support each other, mutual aid. And we've run thrift shops and secondhand events. And perhaps most interestingly, Bernie Sanders and Mary Robinson came for a visit in May of this year to discuss the bigger idea. The bigger idea is this idea of community wealth building. How do we put together a business plan and move the city council and move local procurement and other mechanisms that the city has at its disposal to undertake initiatives around climate that not just mitigate the damage being done environmentally, but create livelihood opportunities, create opportunities for like leveling out what is already quite a challenge in terms of inequality. So that was our program called the Spark, and you can see we've other things that I didn't mention there. We've got a children's climate cooperative, we have a bike library and a library of things, but all of these practices are just to help a community learn how to share and cooperate. And at the end of this process, we want to land at a co-op. We've actually increased our ambition since then. We want to go bigger than a co-op, and our North Star for all of this work exists in Basque Country, in Spain, in Mondragon. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Mondragon. It's quite a remarkable place. We brought a delegation of 20 from Dublin out to visit it. This is Mondragon. regular enough village in the mountains in Basque Country. I'd encourage anyone who can to go there because it's full of factories that are working flat out, doing incredible things in a village where you wouldn't expect to find it. It was founded in the cooperative in Mondragon was founded in 1956 by Jose Maria Arizmendieta. He said this, the workers will not believe in the church's social doctrine if they can't see it put into practice through work for society. Work, capital, and organization are therefore not ends in themselves, but means for better serving human interests. Obviously, as a football club, we're not pushing the church's social doctrine, but I think we're all trying to push climate action. And I think that same phrase holds. If you remove the church's social doctrine, you put in climate action, workers will not believe in climate action if they don't see it put into practice through work for society. And that's what we're all trying to do with a just transition. Mondragon's remarkable. It's 92 cooperatives. It employs 70,000 people. It has revenues of over 11 billion, all worker owned. It's remarkable. And we brought a delegation of 20 out there. I can send anyone who wants it that studied note that we took from the trip, but it's going into informing how we develop our Dublin project. Our bridge to get there, obviously Mondragon's 72 or 70 something years old. We can't get there overnight, so we have to figure out how we get there gradually. After in Cleveland, in Ohio, after the global financial crisis, a group from Cleveland went to Mondragon and brought back a package that they started to implement in Cleveland. A red state, like probably much more aligned to what we can do than maybe a Basque kind of identity project in northern Spain. This is what they set up. They set up the Evergreen Cooperatives. The Evergreen Cooperatives currently are 6 cooperatives. They've over 500 people employed, and they are literally breaking intergenerational poverty. It's remarkable. The minimum wage in Cleveland is about 19,000 euros. There's men and women working in a laundry that is paying them a dividend on top of their wages of 10 or 12,000 euro. That goes into a capital account. They're able to borrow against that capital account. They're able to get houses. They're able to get out from under renting. It's a really, really remarkable economic model. Where we want to go with all of this is a new frontier for the concept of community wealth building. Community wealth building started in Cleveland. It spread to Amsterdam. There's a model being developed there. It's in Preston in the UK. It's in North Ayrshire in Scotland. In fact, Scotland now has a community wealth building minister. I even met with some delegates from South Korea recently who are starting a community wealth building project in Seoul. So it's a global movement. Climate has not been properly integrated into it yet, and that's what we want to do. We want to be the demonstrator that says, if we integrate climate into this, you will get climate justice by economic design. That's the just transition that we want to see. This is the pipeline of cooperatives that we're currently working on starting. We are going to develop an insurance mutual. We've got some really interesting insurance people who are helping us on that. A food cooperative doing school meals, farm to fork school meals with a cooperative embedded in the middle of it. A solar cooperative. We have a very interesting project that we're seeking funding for with UEFA and KPMG and McGann Fitzgerald and a number of very big entities, where we basically put solar on people's roofs for free around our community, and they would pay back through their bills, but we'd be able to do it at such scale that we would suppress the costs of everything, the labor, the materials, even the loan itself, the tenure of the loan, and the laundry co-op, trying to copy Cleveland. Key point to this, and a key reason for why we've been able to do what we've been able to do, is we're not trying to do it alone. We have remarkable network of partners that go from small community groups in our neighborhoods to very big entities like KPMG and trade unions and local utilities. And our only real problem now, and it's what Elisa mentioned to begin with, is funding and resourcing this. So that's my main challenge right now, is finding the funding, finding the supports, so that we can fully embrace all of the goodwill that's coming towards us with this work. That's it. I'm sorry if I took too long.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anna. I still keep having goosebumps every time you present. But I think for me, for instance, we have conversations, including today, earlier on at the Palais, around human rights economy, but maybe we don't talk about some key aspects that I think your experience has highlighted, not only co-developing, but co-owning solutions and the form of cooperatives, how generative and transformative it may be. and the building the collaborative skills and building on authentic connections. I think these are some of the elements among all the amazing work that maybe we're not really seen yet so central. So I thought we'll have just 5 minutes for immediate questions or reactions, just because it's nice to be speaking on the cuff of presentations. But otherwise, we can also save thoughts after we hear the other. Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thanks a lot, Sean, for this amazing presentation. And I think it really embodies everything that was presented in the report. I have an example, actually, that resonated with your experience. I'm French, but from Algerian descent, immigrant family, very economically not privileged background. And in France, we have a movement of decolonial fossil fuels transition actually programs that is owned by mothers. And it was a movement started by mothers, which is a very interesting way to see it, that started actually as a conversation, as you said, locally owned, by a conversation of mothers being actually triggered by the fact that they didn't have many options for their children in school meals. So it started from this conversation, and then it went to the mayor about food sovereignty, actually, because these immigrant women had a certain relationship to land and to farming that they couldn't benefit from. So it started a whole movement and a new design from farm to fork, but as well from this very localized concern to go after into another economic model. And I had actually a question that is linked to how do we ensure that this report and the recommendations that you provide connect all of these amazing initiatives that at the global level, especially because in parallel, the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights is designing its a roadmap on eradication of poverty, and there might be, I see direct links with, for example, the affordable access to energy, universal access to energy, and how do you make sure that the two are actually very interlinked as a new economic model proposed? Thank you.
I'm not sure I can answer to that question other than saying I definitely love to hear more about mothers-led movements, and definitely this one in particular. I know that Astrid is herself one of leaders in a mothers movement on air pollution in Mexico, so I'm sure there's another very, as authentic connection as it can get. But yes, it'll be really interesting to see the work of the UN Special Rapporteur on poverty and those roadmaps, and of course connect maybe other experiences there.
I just add as well, I think what's really challenging about community is that they're highly contested spaces, they're very political spaces, and so like it's very difficult to, having done it myself, search for case studies, and you try to universalize case studies and bring them up. Actually, what we need is to resource people in communities to deal with the complexity of community and not silver bullet the whole thing, because there is none. So I just think that's a key point in terms of how you resource a just transition. It is hugely costly and complex, and we can't shy away from that.
If I may intervene, it's also one of the points that I find so interesting in having more of these local experiences, local stories, lived experiences, as Elisa talks about in her report, is that in the end, we kind of know what we need to do to, solve climate change. The issue is human. It's about power. It's about, human relationships, power relations between states, interstates, between political leaders and their people, between peoples. It's all human related. And that's most often the missing piece that we have at the international or global level, is that basically we still haven't found a way to, tackle these questions, because most often it's not in negotiators' mandates. So it's the missing piece that we need to acknowledge somehow. So I'm really enjoying conversations that talk about communities, friction, politics, and disagreements, because I think we need to learn from that in order to go forward.
I'm conscious of time, so we'll move on and we'll see how the different initiatives may provide some inspiration for the different panelists as well as where they're going forward. So I'm wondering, Kira, if maybe we can try again and hear about the Durban People's Plan on Adaptation.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks very much.
Perfect. We see the presentation, we see and hear you. The floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you. And my colleague Sugen will also be with me. Yes, it's actually good, I think, that we've gone after the case study before us. Our plan is the People's Plan for the Right to Housing in an Age of Climate Change, and we are based in the city of Durban in South Africa. So if we can go to the next slide, you're going to see some images of our city, which are not necessarily happy images, but when we didn't have floods and when we don't have floods, we're a beautiful coastal city of almost 4.2 million people. We have wonderful weather and a very tropical beachfront. However, our story is going to start with that big red cloud coming towards us and what happened on the 11th and 12th of April in 2022. So if you can even go one more slide, you will start to see the devastating floods that happened in our city. Certainly, not many people could remember having such floods, and you will see later what one of our climate scientists have said about it. But the damage to infrastructure was beyond anything we had ever seen before. If you can go to the next slide, please. And you will see too that after the floods, what happened is we had an enormous amount of waste, particularly plastic, pushed back onto our beach right along our coast. And the infrastructure damage that occurred was so severe that large portions of our city had no running water or electricity, in some areas for up to 6 months post those 2 days. Next slide, please. So it was a moment in our city where a severe weather event had such a drastic impact right across the board. This is one of our biggest industry parks. It's Toyota, the car manufacturer. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that the floods that moved through here just moved entire containers right down the highway. But on the next slide, if you were living in informal settlements, the impact of this was just devastating. So if you go one slide on, you will look at the difference between the rivers, the lives lost in informal settlements across our city. And our city is a very spatially unequal one, with lots of people living in informal settlements who do not yet have access to basic services. I think these floods really was a moment for many of us in civil society about what do you do if your local government is not yet planning for severe weather effects linked to climate change, and certainly has not yet started implementing processes for resilience. In all cases, whether you lived in a really wealthy neighborhood or a working class neighborhood or lived in one of the informal settlements as you see here, first responders were your neighbors. And so it is also sadly a moment in our city where people felt quite abandoned by local government. For local governments, they had not yet imagined a flood of this kind, and so actually weren't able to respond at the level that was required. If we can go to the next slide, please. Now, climate scientists in South Africa and some of our top climate modelers have just released a piece of research which we think is important to note. Number one, it's very clear that the flood that came in 2022 was made worse by climate change. So when we are talking about defossilizing our economies, and sadly, we are starting to count the cost of not doing this in people's lives. In 2 days in our city, 544 people lost their lives in those floods. And you can see how many people were displaced who lost homes. On top of that, the economic toll was estimated to $3.6 billion US. All right, so back to that moment. Across civil society, we really had to give thought to what do we do when your city, before the floods, was unequal, spatially did not have equity in terms of infrastructure and access to services, but after the floods had become almost totally broken and dysfunctional in terms of sewage, water, and in some cases, electricity. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Sugen, to take the story further. Sugen.
Thanks so much, Kira. Thanks for setting that useful context. And if you can just have the next slide, please. I think it's interesting, colleagues, how crises serve as catalysts for mobilizing action for change, because it was these climate-induced floods some 3.5 years ago that actually galvanized a grouping of key civil society organizations to huddle together in a restaurant one morning and decide on a course of action. Many of us were very, very concerned that, as Kira mentioned, the first responders during this and other climate-induced events were from communities themselves and not from government. Moreover, we heard that our national treasury was to release over $50 million US to the city. And we are really worried whether these funds will be directed to entrench the status quo, which Kira spoke about, or genuinely transforming Durban to be a more just, inclusive, and climate resilient one. So clearly, we couldn't leave it to chance, and we decided to establish what is now known as the Durban Coalition, with nearly 30 member organizations and 7 technical support members. So very quickly, in the coalition, we spent our first year attempting to engage the local state and to hold it accountable. More importantly, build our own capacity through training of our member organizations, a team that has already come out. And our membership felt that the main priority was around taking action to address the most marginalized communities' right to housing within a context of climate change. And we decided as civil society to drive that process entirely ourselves. Hence, it's a people's plan. Our next slide summarizes the process that we followed. So sorry for this messy diagram, but we really want to show here that developing a truly bottom-up process took us 14 months of carefully documenting what the issues around shelter facing the urban poor in our city are, and then importantly, crafting a plan of action with tangible programs and projects. So I must say at this point, as an urban planner who had worked previously in the municipality, it was a real learning process, because we started by listening to ordinary voices. It wasn't a plan developed by the state and merely consulted and tested. The next slide gives you a sense of the first phase of engaging each of the key sectors and preparing them for our first listening gathering session to jointly articulate what are the shared challenges. I think this resonates with the key message of listening that Elisa spoke about. Next slide. And then after documenting and producing the draft document, a second phase involved now crafting, devising solutions together in what we call a solidarity session. In the next slide, please. The picture on the right shows participants in the solidarity session. I think what's unique was that in this event, we started to involve actors from the state, from other technical professions, as well as our leading academics from South African universities, who were showing solidarity with those most marginalized and helped to jointly craft this plan of action. Next slide, please. So once we drafted this draft 0, once we had it in place, we then followed a really vigorous testing process through a series of bilateral meetings with members, with advisors, and we then came up with our first draft. What was really interesting was that this methodology and this piece of the presentation is really about methodology, because we think it might be useful to share experiences. I think what was useful was that we then went through a whole process of ground truthing the plan. In other words, testing this draft with the member organizations, their respective constituencies. So in the next slide, we just want to emphasize that before going out to constituencies, it was important again to build capacity, to train member organizations, both on the content of the plan so that they take ownership of it, and around facilitation and how to run effective workshops. Next slide, please. So I must say that the results were really overwhelming. So for example, on the screen are workshops of testing the plan with Abishlali Basem Jondolo, that's on the left, which is South Africa's largest member-based shack dweller organization. And on the right there, Ubunye Amahostela, which is an organized hostel dwellers organization. This process was driven entirely by the members themselves that were trained by us in the coalition. The next slide, please. And then the hard work of reworking that plan based on listening, based on the comments. We then produced draft 2, and we finally launched it after a full 14 months since inception. So sorry, dear colleagues, for going into the detailed process, but we really felt it's important to talk about the value of real engagement, of listening, of talking to everyone and taking all of us with us. So yes, civil society led the way, but state actors were also our partners. In the last slide of this section, I just want to say that we're proudly showing off the cover of the People's Plan there, which interestingly was produced both in English and isiZulu, which is our province's local language, just to promote accessibility and reach of the plan. Kira will quickly share what the exact plan entails in the next few slides, now that we have understood the entire process of building the People's Plan. Thanks, Kira.
Thank you so much again. And if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, and we are happy to share the link to the People's Plan. But in essence, the idea is that there are 4 strong, rooted, beautiful trees that together create a sort of forest, which for us is our metaphor of being protected in the city. One focuses very much on human settlements, including things like how you retrofit state housing so that it not just is resilient in terms of flooding, but in terms of extreme heat, which is another severe weather event which we are getting more and more in our city, and even relooking norms and standards for how we build housing. Of course, dealing with displaced people, this is an ongoing issue. Even since 2022, we've had groups of people, successive floods now, losing their homes. And importantly, how we really start to create new governance frameworks. I think the previous speaker also said, like, you cannot do this alone. What we have realized, perhaps it's different in your municipalities or with your local government, but actually they are not sure what to do. We don't yet have the answers for how we are going to live through these kinds of unpredictable weather due to climate change. So the more we can come together and learn from each other, the better. And included in that, of course, is very much security of tenure, especially for the most marginalized groupings within the Durban Coalition. That includes shack dwellers, people who live in hostels, which is very particular sort of apartheid type housing that still continues today, and refugees in our city. If we can go to the next slide, please. I will try and move through this quite fast. The good news is that bringing in those city officials right from the beginning meant that we managed to co-launch this plan with our city. And that's quite a big thing, because it had been very difficult to reach into and talk to local government. It had been hard to get a space around the table. And so for many of us, we felt like this was a win. if we can go to the next slide, this year, after further engagement, our municipality has integrated the People's Plan into their own integrated development plan. This is really important because for us, it's like we now almost have, the city is mandated to start to action some of these programs and projects, and more importantly, mandated to do that with people, not for them. Next slide, please. However, and I really don't want to sound cynical here, I think we take it as being optimistic but pragmatic. And that is that we will not wait for local government. They have a lot of work to do and they're really important. But given what we are facing, we do not want to sit back and wait for government to somehow miraculously make our city more resilient. So the Durban Coalition, all those members came together, we interrogated our own plan again, and then we selected the pieces that we knew could be community-led and which were urgent, and that is community-led disaster management. So what we've started to do is hold big learning exchanges where all sorts of community members, universities, researchers, and city departments are learning from each other what it means to be prepared for the disasters that are coming our way, how we can also retrofit our areas. One of the things in our city was very poor waste management. So when you've got canals, for example, and drains that are totally blocked up with waste, your flooding is exacerbated. When you get dangerous floods, that means they become even more dangerous. Next slide, please. And you can go one further. That's just the same event. So just lastly to say, the other thing we started to do, and this is, I think, an important moment, is we've brought some of our really well-known scientists who are modeling climate change, and we brought them right into these spaces with community-based organizations, with flood-affected groups. So rather than keep the science sort of abstracted, we are really trying to bring it right into our own understanding, even if that means sometimes it's hard because it's very, very technical. But we think it's important. It's a moment, in fact, where we need to really start to understand what the science is starting to say. So if we can go to the next slide. And why this is important is because what the scientists are telling us is that actually these types of flooding events are going to become more frequent. So that could literally be next year. So when we think about a future where we have to deal with climate change, that future for many people who are experiencing severe weather events is already here. And so we need to prepare. We need to prepare ourselves as communities, but we also need to push and advocate for local government and other stakeholders to come together to ensure that we've got early warning systems that work and that we can evacuate people out of harm's way. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, it's been a very exciting, but also very frustrating. I mean, attempting to work with government over long periods of time. Our municipality is very under-resourced in many ways. Probably one of the most exciting things I think I've certainly done. But our key takeaways is, as I've said, global warming, the severe weather events, they are already here. We have to start to plan for them. So again, I don't know if you want to move on to the second and third and fourth point.
Sure. Maybe just to emphasize the point around strong civil society leadership, real and meaningful participatory processes that are led not by state actors are important for building resilience. I think at the same time, whilst non-state actors are driving, we have to have effective partnerships between both state and civil society. I think, having said this, it might sound theoretical. It does require lots and lots of hard work. It takes lots of time. and requires processes of trust building. Kira?
Thanks again. And then maybe just to end, I personally am based at Groundwork, which is an environmental justice NGO in South Africa. So I feel that it's fine for me to say this. It's not controversial at all. But at the heart of this, we cannot stop our demand for the end to fossil fuels. All of this work we're doing, all the preparedness, the retrofitting, the trying to adapt, the attempts at resilience, of course, we have to do that. Practically, we have to do that. However, if we're going to just continuously increase the kinds of greenhouse gases that fossil fuels are doing and heat up the environment, we are creating for ourselves an ever more dangerous place to live. And for us, defossilizing our economies means that we save lives. So rather than think about what we have to give up if we defossilize, I think what we're really starting to realize is what we gain. And we gain lives, we save lives, and we save critical urban infrastructure in our cities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so again, and Kira and Talia, who's also there. I think just incredible story of co-development and also piloting new governance frameworks, the iterative engagement, and what I knew about the city adopting your plan, I find so inspiring also that you did not wait for them, even if they are now committed to prioritize those projects and fund them, but that reinterrogating your own plan, identifying what could go ahead as a community-led initiative. And another piece that's crucial, and again, we've talked about it maybe a bit in the abstract here in Geneva, but this idea of bringing the climate scientists into community places, into the dialogue with lived experiences, very powerful. Among the many things I've learned and I've been inspired by your presentation. So I'll see if there's any immediate question or comment for your presentation. Yes, there is one. Please go.
Hello, I'm Beatrice Kalimanshi, coming from Southern Africa. And I'm very inspired of what you have just said. This flood, I remember very well, it started from Durban, and it went and crashed southern Zambia. A lot of people died. And the whole 2022, there was no food. By the grace of, they didn't even get any food from others. But the president, Hakainde Hichilema, did wonders just to create the environment where he fetched food to give the people. So thank you so much for your initiative. Thank you.
Conscious of time, but I'm wondering if there's any other thought or question or reflection. Otherwise, we'll keep, I think, this learning with us as we listen to the next. But thank you so much again. And we can now give the floor to Joanna Ziegler from our Children's Trust. And Joanna, let us know if you're there and ready to go. I think we're seeing you appearing. Perfect. So I'll just let you introduce the initiative and just run with it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being a part of this discussion and hearing about the community initiatives that were presented before me. I will try to share my screen as well. Let's see. Oh gosh, okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Technology is working. As was mentioned, my name is Joanna Ziegler, and I am a staff attorney at a legal nonprofit called Our Children's Trust. Our Children's Trust provides legal services to youth to secure their rights to a safe climate. And we represent people in global legal efforts to secure binding and enforceable rights to a healthy atmosphere and a stable climate based on best available science. So ultimately, our goal with our cases is to represent young people's right to live, breathe, and grow up in a safe and healthy climate. So I work mostly on our state cases that we are developing and have filed in the United States. And I'm going to speak to one in particular today that actually started out in our adversarial system, the legal system, and ended in an and is now in a space where it's more community involvement. So these presentations about community involvement have really resonated with me and are applicable to our work in Hawaii now. So this picture that's on my screen is many of the youth that we represented in Hawaii. And this is the day where we're all smiles because we announced a settlement agreement that I will talk about. So let's see. Okay, perfect. So in 2022, we filed a case in Hawaii on behalf of 13 youth, and their ages ranged from 9 to 18 years old. And the case was against the Hawaii Department of Transportation, which I'll call HDOT. The youth were from across the Hawaiian Islands and have experienced severe impacts from climate change, including loss of their homes from flooding and wildfire, sea level rise, coral die-offs, impacts to native plants that are culturally important to Native Hawaiian existence. One of them, namely, is called kalo. It's part of the Hawaiian origination story and depends on abundant fresh water to cultivate kalo and is being affected by the severe droughts that are happening in Hawaii. So the case asserted that HDOT's operation of the transportation system results in high levels of greenhouse gas emissions, which violates the youth's constitutional rights and causes them significant harm, impacting their ability to live healthful lives in Hawaii. So the youth sought zero emissions from transportation by 2045 in their lawsuit. And in the case, we brought it under two constitutional provisions that exist in the Hawaii Constitution. The first one is called the Public Trust Doctrine, which exists throughout the United States, but is not always in a constitution for a state. So this state constitutional provision is pretty widespread and protective. And it provides that for the benefit of present and future generations, the state shall conserve and protect Hawaii's natural beauty and all natural resources. So in many instances, the public trust doctrine protects water, but in Hawaii, it specifically provides for protection of all natural resources. And then the second provision in the Constitution is the provision that provides for a clean and healthful environment, and states that each person has the right to a clean and healthful environment as defined by the laws relating to environmental quality. And there were many laws that were a complaint that were relevant. However, there's two that were prominent in the case. The first one is a statewide mandate for net negative emissions by 2045, and then another state statute that provided for zero emissions across transportation modes. So this case went pretty far, and we got close to trial, and all of the plaintiffs sat for a deposition. We exchanged thousands of papers and documents and discovery. We had 10 experts write reports on behalf of the youth, supporting their case as far as climate science, transportation, and impacts to Hawaii from climate science. And on the eve of trial, the director of the Department of Transportation approached us. was willing to sit down at the table and listen to what the youth were asking for in this case. And eventually we were able to negotiate a landmark settlement agreement. So I'll talk about some of the key takeaways from our settlement agreement and how it's being applied going forward. So the first one is that the settlement contains a recognition of rights, which was really important that that the government in settling the case recognized the rights of these young people as protected under their constitution. So it provides that each person in the state has a right to a clean and healthful environment, which includes the right to a life-sustaining climate system. And the settlement also recognizes that the public trust includes the protection of air and other trust resources affected by climate change. HDOT also agreed to take all actions necessary to achieve zero emissions no later than 2045 in ground, sea, and inter-island air transportation. So this was sort of the heart of the settlement agreement, that the government said, yes, we will work to achieve zero emissions in transportation by 2045. One of the things that we learned throughout the case and through this settlement is that where the money is spent is how you can see how how prioritizing projects and the emissions that result from that. And so HDOT did agree to reform its budgeting and programming framework to prioritize projects that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions rather than perpetuating the status quo of road widening and other projects that end up increasing greenhouse gas emissions. And then one other really key aspect of the settlement agreement is that HDOT agreed to create a youth council. So this case was brought by youth, and now youth actually have representation within the agency and meet regularly. The council has already been formed, and they meet regularly to give HDOT feedback and to inform HDOT of the needs of youth and their communities so that HDOT can take that into consideration when planning and prioritizing its projects. As far as the greenhouse gas reduction plan, the HDOT has drafted the plan already, and it went out for public comment and is being finalized and will be published by October 15th of this year. So we'll see this plan that the community has given impact in come out and will essentially be a roadmap to zero emissions by 2045 within the transportation sector. And then one other really important aspect of the settlement agreement was that the court retained jurisdiction, meaning that the youth can go back to court if they need to enforce this settlement and do not have to file an entirely new action. The court is essentially supervising the implementation of the settlement and will ensure that it is fulfilled. So we're really proud of this negotiation process and the things that that HDOT were willing to agree to, and some aspects that really make this settlement agreement special is that it's just really unparalleled in its nature and scope. We're not aware of any other climate case that has had such a strong set of remedies to mitigate climate change. And we really hope that this settlement and this case can serve as a model for the United States and globally for what can be accomplished when the government takes the opportunity to listen to the youth and really come to the table and create a framework for moving forward. So that's what I have. I think I can stop sharing screen. Let me see.
Yeah, John, and I really appreciate those final comments around, again, that point around how remedies can actually create space for a different model of governance, a different model, in fact, also maybe a better model of democracy, and also that space for maybe co-development solutions. And I just wonder if you have anything more to say about how the Youth Council is interacting with the authorities, what's been also mutual learning, but maybe also challenges. But I think that, yeah, intergenerational democracy aspect, and then the role of the court backing it up, like creating the structure and then remaining available in case of difficulties. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, so it's been I think a learning process for oops. Do I have an echo? No, okay, sorry. As far as, yeah, the Youth Council, it certainly has been a learning process. I think this is a unique model for, especially in the United States, for feedback to government planning. And we've been fortunate that HDOT has been sort of open to this process and creating this new form of governance. And the Youth Council has met several times and has even formed its own committees as far as what the youth are figuring out are priorities for them. They've formed a committee for legislation, so they're going to be thinking about in the next legislative session for the Hawaii government what types of priorities they think HDOT should be presenting to the legislature, and our meeting is a separate committee for that. They have sort of a communications committee that they've been working on, and I think kind of tying together the previous presentations, they are a direct connection to the community. And so they're able to sort of take their influence to the Department of Transportation. And I think part of that goal is to bring it to the community and help the community understand why this transition is so important. Because, you know, we've seen this great result with this settlement agreement and HDOT, you know, working and trying to get this greenhouse gas reduction plan in place. But once it's published and shown to the community, then we need to help educate the community as to why it's so important, because otherwise it feels like sort of what has been discussed already, this sort of imposition, right? Or this, you know, telling the community what needs to happen next. And it almost feels like, you know, when you talk about transportation, you're talking about how people get to their work and get their groceries and their livelihoods. And so we want to make sure that the needs of the community are incorporated into that transition. So really communicating that public transportation is a big aspect of this transition off of fossil fuels, getting folks into effective public transportation, which I know is maybe happening in a lot of other places, but is not happening in Hawaii. The public transportation system needs a lot of improvements. And another aspect that the youth are sort of communicating to their community is improvements to bicycle and pedestrian access. In Hawaii, it's not safe at all to ride your bike anywhere because there's just not the infrastructure in place to have safely travel between your home and where you need to get to. So helping to get the community involved, planning where that bike infrastructure is most critically needed, where the public transportation infrastructure needs to be improved, and having it become more of a dialogue. And I think that Youth Council is really important to making that happen.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't know if there's another very quick comment or question. We're tight on time, but I don't want to cut the conversation. Otherwise, just to drop that Sean is one of the children's rights experts that has supported my journey as a children's rights expert. So it's great to see a children-led initiative and then what that can bring about. So thank you so much for that, John. And I might just pass the floor right away to Angel and Lucero. Let's see if we can hear from you about indigenous-led just transition. And again, based on litigation and looking at how that can secure, reclaim, in fact, local budgets. Lucero, we
Yes.
can see you.
Excellent. Yes.
And Angel as well.
Can you hear me?
So you have the floor.
Can you
Just
hear me?
yes,
Oh, great.
go ahead.
Thank you. Excellent. So thank you very much to the Geneva Environment Network and Rapporteur Morgera for this opportunity. It's been a really inspiring morning. Sometimes in the times we live in, it's easy to lose hope and feel like everybody's fighting their own struggle. So I feel very encouraged by hearing all of these efforts. And I think I discovered my new favorite soccer team. So maybe Shan will have to tell me how I can get one of those jerseys. So my name is Angel Cabrera. I'm a professor at UDA, but I'm today here as a member of Colectivo Emancipaciones, which is a local collective of lawyers based in Morelia, Mexico, the city of Morelia, Mexico. I'm joined now by Lucero Ibarra, who is one of the founding members of the Colectivo, who has been active in indigenous rights litigation since 2013 and remains active even today. And so Colectivo Emancipaciones is a legal organization of non-indigenous lawyers that work in close collaboration with indigenous authorities and indigenous institutions in order to support their self-governance. So our work is basically to put legal tools like litigation, administrative representation, etc., in support of indigenous communities that are struggling to organize and to establish their own institutions of self-governance. And the way that we do that is by trying to make sure or ensuring that they have the financial resources necessary, not only to just implement specific particular projects, which is the way that normally grant and financing schemes work, just providing funds to some particular projects. We worked in order to make sure that they have the financial resources necessary to fund the sustained operations of their own institutions of self-government. That is the local structures through which the community is organized and the local structures that allowed for that community to come up and make decisions about their own development. Over time, we've used human rights litigation, and in doing so, we've emphasized the duty that states have to make sure that they distribute public funds in a way that it's equitable and that supports the survival, establishment, and thriving of indigenous institutions of self-government. So we have litigated in a way that emphasizes the financial dimension of indigenous rights to self-determination. And the way over time we've managed to do so, and over time we've constructed what we locally is now known as the right to direct budgeting, which is not a human right recognized in any international treaty, but it's a local application, a local appropriation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I would have loved if some of my indigenous colleagues were here to share with you directly their experiences. Unfortunately, because of timing and language barriers, it was not possible for them to be live here, but they did send and prepared a video that I would like to share with the audience today by the community, the current authorities of the indigenous community of Donaciano Ojeda, which is a Mazahua community in the central region of Mexico, precisely where the sanctuary of the monarch butterfly is located, and that has been doing great work precisely in environmental issues. So I don't know if somebody from the organizers could help me show the video. Thanks.
Buenas tardes, soy Armando Carmona, presidente de autogobierno de la comunidad indígena de Donaciano Ojeda.
Buenas tardes, soy Abigail González Durán, consejera secretaria de la misma comunidad Mazahua de Donaciano Ojeda.
Agradecemos este espacio breve que nos brinda la relatora Elisa Morgera. Nos complace poder participar en este momento. Y quiero informarles que la comunidad de Donaciano Ojeda es una comunidad clavada en el oriente michoacano, una comunidad con 2.500 hectáreas de bosque en la reserva de la biosfera la mariposa monarca, y también principal captadora de sus bosques de agua que abastece el sistema Cutzamala, que le da vida a través del agua al Valle de México y a la Ciudad de México.
mencionar que nuestra comunidad de Donación Ojeda es una de las 40 comunidades de México que ha conquistado el derecho al presupuesto directo. Esto a través de la lucha continua de estas comunidades unidas, y a través de ese presupuesto ha venido a fortalecer ese trabajo que se ha desarrollado de manera histórica por el cuidado y la conservación del medio ambiente.
46 comunidades de autogobierno hemos encontrado el sustento legal en el artículo 4 de la Declaración de la ONU sobre el ejercicio del presupuesto directo, sobre el derecho a que una parte proporcional en relación a la población se pueda dirigir directamente a las comunidades indígenas para que éstas decidan su forma de administración y el tipo de obra, también el costo que tendrá esta obra en sus lugares. Este presupuesto directo ha venido a fortalecer actividades forestales donde las comunidades implementan viveros forestales endémicos del lugar. Podemos hacer saneamiento, restauración, reforestación y también, por supuesto, la conservación y vigilancia de los bosques para que no hagan cambio de suelo o haya una tala clandestina.
En este sentido, gracias al presupuesto directo, al contar con un recurso económico, se han fortalecido justamente esos proyectos que benefician a nuestros bosques. Se han hecho partícipes a los niños, a las mujeres de la comunidad que forman parte fundamental de estos trabajos. En resumen, se ha venido a fortalecer la participación, la unión y la organización que han desarrollado históricamente nuestras comunidades indígenas.
Agradecemos y felicitamos a Elisa Morgera por su informe y por esta lucha que implementa por el cambio climático. Hay que motivar y estimular justamente la conservación, la organización de las comunidades indígenas. El 80% del territorio está en los ejidos y comunidades. Necesitamos fortalecer esta parte, pero sobre todo los procesos de las comunidades indígenas que conservan las tradiciones, la cultura, la identidad. Es muy breve el tiempo, pero en este momento se encuentra nuestro amigo y compañero de lucha, Ángel Cabrera, que puede responder a muchas de estas preguntas de los procesos, de las formas, y ya está, también lo vamos a asumir de las comunidades indígenas.
Reconocemos el trabajo de la relatora Morgera. Agradecemos este espacio por permitirnos de viva voz manifestar esta lucha y sobre todo manifestar que nos sumamos y seguimos reiterando nuestro compromiso por esta lucha global por el planeta.
Great. So the community of Donaciano, thank you very much for showing the video. So the community of Donación Ojeda is one out of 46 indigenous communities that currently in Mexico are exercising this right that we call the right to direct budgeting. And the invitation to this event was really thought-provoking for me because we have generally been approaching this from the perspective of indigenous self-determination and indigenous rights. We knew that our work was having an impact in the capacity of indigenous communities to implement environmental protection projects, because that's one of the main issues that particularly indigenous regions in Mexico experience the effects of climate change in a disproportionate manner. So we knew that our work was kind of supporting those efforts, but we hadn't thought about how these fit in the broader struggle for a just transition. And so this invitation was very thought-provoking because, in fact, what I realize now is that our work has been changing the structure of the fiscal system in Mexico in a way that it's allowing for a more just distribution of funds. So Mexico is still an economy that is supported in a large part by fossil fuels. So fossil production in Mexico is still a significant part of the government revenue. And those funds were generally allocated in very discriminatory ways to support government-led projects that only marginally included indigenous communities. So while our work is perhaps not challenging the fossil nature of Mexican economy, it is at least making sure that the tax revenue and the money that is collected through the activities of the Mexican government is distributed in a way that empowers indigenous communities to at least implement projects that mitigate the impacts of climate change. So In the case of Dona Ciara Ojeda, that has meant the protection of their forests, the protection of their water reservoirs. Every indigenous community is affected differently, even if they are located in the same region of Mexico. The impact that they feel it's different. Some indigenous communities have experienced more impacts of drought. Those that are closer to the lakes and the rivers have experienced drought more significantly. The ones that have forests, like the Ciara Ojeda, have felt the impact more in their capacity of their forests to sustain their economies and their activities. And so having funds flow in a different way has allowed each community to implement projects that makes the most sense for them. And in a way that also empowers those indigenous communities to become stronger and more organized so that they can start then demanding larger responsibility from state institutions and also from private institutions. So I wanted to kind of bring that point of how creative litigation of human rights can challenge the structure of fiscal system in a way that supports more equitable approach to development, in particular just transition, which I think also speaks to the issue of direct financing that is currently an open question in the field of international development, international financing for sustainable development. Another point that I think speaks to all of the examples that have been presented today is the importance of meaningful participation. So not just participation for the sake of participation, but actually meaningful participation. And in the context of environmental justice and indigenous communities, the right of indigenous peoples to a free, prior, and informed consultation or consent has been a primary focus. It has been a primary focus for international institutions and also for the Mexican government. The idea that their obligations towards indigenous communities require them only to consult. And we've learned by our own experience as indigenous rights lawyers that consultations have become a very tenuous form of participation that is very easily manipulated, that places indigenous communities in a position of just reacting to a project that somebody else is leading. And that even if it's very important, the right to indigenous consultation has become an important tool to defend against abusive projects. It has a very limited capacity to actually empower the possibility of indigenous communities to lead their own development. So what we have been trying to do is to take a different approach to the issue of indigenous self-determination that uses consultations in a more creative way. So the direct indigenous budgetings are established through an indigenous consultation where the indigenous community actually presents to the state the claim that they have the right to be consulted on how the ordinary distribution of public funds is distributed. So they shouldn't just be consulted about particular specific projects, but how the regular distribution of public funds that are meant to support their development, how they're distributed. And in exercise of those consultations, the indigenous communities have decided that it is their political decision to administer those funds directly through their own institutions. So in this way, the indigenous consultations were transformed to allow for a more meaningful participation of indigenous communities through their own structures of self-governments that have the capacity, the legal capacity, and also the financial capacity to implement projects based on their own priorities. So I wanted to highlight those 2 points and how they see this case kind of relating to the same topics of the other scenarios. And I would like to cede the floor to Lucero, who will have a little more to say on that.
Thank you so much, Angel. Yes, I think one question could be, why is this effort in litigation that Angel highlighted worthwhile? And I think there are 3 key points in relation which has already been said. One of them is that communities can do something about global change. I think direct budgeting is relevant in showing that community-level initiatives are essential to bring forward structural and policy changes. These alternatives are not small or limited. They represent a reality of doing things different, of intertwining a concern with better economic conditions for our population, but also better in their environment. That this is not a compromise between those 2 goals, but it is about how those 2 goals are directed towards a commitment to life, which is a big point for the communities. I'm a big fan of Mondragon as well. And I remember once when we were visiting one of the factories and they were talking about their environmental policies. And one of them said, well, this is very important to us because if the river of this town gets polluted, that affects my kids, that affects me. This is about me who lives here. Another thing that I think it's important is that direct budgeting has also opened up some changes in the communities, particularly in strengthening the leadership of women. There has been a change of leadership or new opportunities. Women usually didn't take part of traditional leadership in indigenous communities in many places. In these cases, there are new structures to handle the budget, and those new structures do include a lot of women. Women, mothers, are concerned about the health of the community, and there is a very important dimension of care that has been brought forward in the way that communities are handling that budget. The maintenance, the recovery of the environment, it's a priority in those governments, because on one hand, women care about the erosion of the nature that they saw as kids around, but they also believe that kids need to be educated in caring for the environment, because this is a concern about their health. So education also becomes about doing. Many of the initiatives that Armando was talking about in that video are initiatives that include the active participation of kids. And this is very important because it is a way to also think how this concern can go forward, can go into the future. And kids are part of the present in that context. So yeah, health and environment are seen as linked concerns in many of these governments. So this is about how they reinterpret the struggle for self-government, which was often seen as a struggle for life. The last thing is how the handling of resources happens in this context. And Angel already highlighted something that I think it's the difference between participation and leadership, between participation in public choices and making those public choices and being the authority. Communities that receive public budget get very little money, like they don't get a lot, but they do big things with that money through good management and also through community involvement. So it's a different way in which a public budget is being administered. In many cases in these communities, they also seek this kind of self-government because of the influence of organized crime in the region. And organized crime is not really seen often as it, but it is a factor in the erosion of the environment. At least in many areas in Mexico, it is. In most of the communities that see organized crime come, they also see organized crime involved in the overexploitation of the natural resources. So those communities, when they opt for self-government, they also kick out organized crime, but then the territory needs to be recovered. The health of the territory needs to be recovered. That's why they activate all these efforts that they already talked about. And this is also, this is related with our worldview and spirit and has a spiritual dimension, but in some cases at least, but in all cases, it is also led by the certainty that no wealth is worth sacrificing a future in their own territory. And I think this is very important. I think the main challenge that they face to, I don't know if make more change, but to project their contribution in other parts, is that often what happens in indigenous communities gets dismissed as something that can't be done anywhere else. But I think that what they are showing is that if you stop seeing economic and community goals as separated and start seeing as how you can integrate them in a plan, you can do a lot for the environment and for the health of the territory and the community.
Thank you so much. And also to your colleagues who prepared the video, I really appreciate the time that went into that. I know we might be about to be kicked out of our room, but I still want to have a moment to acknowledge all the, all the learning and insights from your work, challenging fiscal structure and, really, reclaiming those rights, particularly the most like thorny questions around self-determination, sharing decision-making power, and through that, like, again, piloting whole new approaches, including to fighting organized crime and, again, reclaiming, rehabilitating environmental and sociocultural conditions, and supporting also change within communities. So really interesting to see all the dynamics of transformation that have been enabled by this work. And of course, I think the evidence that's coming from that should support that global claims for direct access for communities also to international climate finance and other finance, including research and development more broadly, that we still don't seem to have got enough attention and buy-in, despite the abundant evidence of how other types of finance are more harmful than generally helping us along the path towards a safer climate. I'll just look around the room if there's any question or comment. It was really inspiring. And just to say, I hope this will be the first of conversations and deeper engagements with your work and connecting of really relevant, inspiring, because we all need that learnings, but also maybe for all of us to think about how this can be scaled up, scaled wide, scaled deep. So for how much today the time was a bit limited, I think it's been a really important series of connections we've made. I'm so grateful for the time you've gifted us and all the insights from your work. I could see people were taking copious notes, and I think we're all deeply inspired. And we'll remain in touch, and let us know what you think about how we can further communicate your work and connect and see where we can get more and more inspired and hopefully change a few minds and hearts along the way. But with that, I'll thank again the organizers, UNU, the Geneva Environment Network, all of you for being available to join the first of, I think, a series of more and more transformative conversations. Thank you all so much, and to those that were listening to us online, and we'll probably have to run from this room now. Thank you again. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.